going to turn it over to them. Why don't they just snap out of it? It's going to be presented by June Zwier and Winnie Visser, and they're both joining us today from Ontario. So Winnie and June, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you, Kim. Welcome, everyone. Very pleased that you've joined us for this hour. We can't really say good afternoon because I understand you're coming from all different places, so thanks for joining us. I'm June Zwier, and I'm going to start introductions of myself, and then Winnie will introduce herself. Most important credentials is that I've been married for 40 years. I have 2 grown-up children who are doing well, and 4 grandchildren, which is the major blessing in my life. And I have been doing social services or working in the mental health field, it seems like a long time. Well, since I graduated from Calvin in 1974. So I've been working with developmentally handicapped, and then I moved on to working with people with mental illness. My last position was with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and this position I'm in now is with Shalem Mental Health Network. I went back to school later to get my master's in divinity at Tyndale Seminary and the focus in counseling, and then continued my schooling to become a registered member of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. So I'm currently doing working for Shalem with several different hats. I'm doing marriage and family therapy. I'm also working with Shalem as a mental health resource director, and under the same umbrella I'm working with Faith and Hope Ministries with Winnie for Classis Quinte, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The reason I'm so passionate about this topic and excited to be with you is because of some of my experiences with people with mental illness, and mainly the experience I had at the Canadian Mental Health Association and in a clubhouse, coordinating a clubhouse program, which seemed to me to be the model or a picture of what the church could be, because people came out of their brokenness. Everyone there came because they were broken in some way and suffering, and so we worked together and worked from our strengths, or even trying to find our strengths and gifts together. And we also worked on developing very healthy relationships, strong relationships, and a healthy community, safe and healthy community for people to be a part of. So that's the reason I'm excited about this, because I've been a long-term, forever member of the Christian Reformed Church and see the potential that we could be, and that we could become this healthy community that God wants us to be. So I'm going to turn it over to Winnie to introduce herself, and then I will go on to talk about Faith and Hope Ministries.
Hi everyone, I'm Winnie Visser. I have been married for 33 years this year. I have 4 adult children, 3 of them are married, and have 2 wonderful grandchildren. What a great time of life that is. A little bit about my background is that in 1979 I went to Calvin, only for a year though. I returned to Ontario, took my practical nursing at that time, then worked in geriatrics for 5 years, and then in psychiatry for 16 years. I, at that time, just really grew to love the population, those that suffered from mental health issues. But I just knew that there was something missing there, and that faith aspect. So I went back to Tyndale Seminary and also completed a Master's of Divinity in Counseling, and did the further courses and became a registered marriage and family therapist. So presently I have a part-time counseling practice of 2 days a week. I do that privately. I also work 2.5 days as a Congregational Care Coordinator at Fellowship Christian Reformed Church in Brighton, Ontario. And then with June, I'm a resource consultant for Faith and Hope Ministries, supported by Classis Quinte. I just really I guess why I am doing this too is because I just really love the population and want our churches to learn how to support our family and friends in a way that I just know that they can. Our church communities have something special to offer. We have the love of Christ to offer, and I do believe that we can do this job well if we are well informed about what and who we are dealing with.
So we're going to go on to explain a little bit about Faith and Hope Ministries. This is a ministry Winnie and I, this is June again, Winnie and I work for in Classis Quinte, which is in Ontario. It covers churches from east of Toronto to Kingston and north to Peterborough, Lindsay, if you know the area at all. So it's about 18 churches. Now this didn't happen overnight. In fact, it's been over 10 years that we've been working on this, and it started just as an overture to classes to look at mental illness. Moved into a task force. Sounds familiar, right? Moved into a task force and then a pilot project for 3 years, and finally we're at the point of being a ministry that's supported by Classis Quinte, but on a very part-time basis. So we had to be in it for the long haul because it took a lot of time and convincing that this was important. But now we're here, we're able to get into different churches and communities and offer support, and we are excited about that. We've also been able to join the mental health task force from disability concerns, so we're working closely together with our own CRC disability concerns on mental health issues as well. And our main goal in Faith and Hope Ministries is to help communities serve, or our communities of faith serve and support those who are experiencing mental illness by welcoming, being inclusive, and using their gifts and building relationships, and also a healthy community. So Winnie's going to tell you a little bit more about where we're at right now with Faith and Hope Ministries.
So right now what we do is we get we do workshops. We do have a variety of workshops that we do at different churches in the area. We also go outside of our church, our own CRC denomination. We've done some work with Baptist and the Anglicans, and anyways, we've gone to different churches, and we've done congregational meetings. We've done a presentation there. We've even done workshops when there are suicides in the churches. That's been and with tremendous grief. We've also done services, Sunday morning services, where we have prepared a sermon and have done the whole service. And we've also had about 3 or 4 conferences now where we get speakers from all around to come. We do discussions and do some worship time, as well as hear from people. We've had Bill McPhee, he's from the Schizophrenia Digest down. He's a Christian. We've also had doctors that have spoken, psychiatrists that have spoken that are Christian, and we've had great success with panel discussions with people that have actual lived experience. So now we are ready to move forward, and we will go on to why this training is important.
Thanks, Winnie. Yeah, it's June again, and we're very excited to be able to provide this training and learning opportunities for you and for all our churches. And the reason for that is we know how important this awareness training is. We have heard comments in the past about, wow, I haven't been able to talk about this. Finally, I have a safe place to talk about this, and we are trying to encourage the churches to be that safe place. So why is this so important? First of all, it can strike any person in any family. So it's mental illness is prevalent, and it's in our churches as well. 1 in 4 families have a close relative, so they are experiencing this very close up. 1 in every 5 Canadians have a mental health problem at some point in their lives. 1 in 4 American adults experience mental illness in a given year. And at any given time, 14.8 million Americans suffer from depression. That's a lot of people. And I believe that stat is pretty low. So also, we know that anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States, and they affect more than 40 million ages 18 and over. We also know that effective treatments are available. Yet, and this is the really sad part, many do not seek treatment due to the stigma. So we need to change that. And we know mood disorders such as depression are the 3rd most common cause of hospitalization in the United States for both youth and adults ages 18 to 44. And people often turn to the church. This is surprising, but the research is showing that people still turn to the church in times of crisis and suffering. But our pastors and ministry leaders do not necessarily feel equipped to handle this, so they aren't feeling adequately trained or ready to support people. So, more specifically, why should our churches care? Now, this may sound a little bit like we're repeating ourselves, but some things do bear to be repeated. So, 1 in 4 people in your church is affected by mental illness. So it doesn't discriminate. It's people from all races, creeds, income, social classes, and the stigma, which we mentioned before, keeps the people from sharing their stories in your congregation. So they seldom get the support that they need and that we give to other people with other illnesses. And then more than half of the people who seek outside help turn first to their clergy or faith leaders, as we said. So this is very important to think about. And they do this before they seek help from the medical community or the mental health community. So if you're a faith leader, do you feel prepared to counsel or support people with mental health issues? Or if you're a member of a leadership team, do you feel adequate? It's something to think about, and we need to provide education to be able to do that. And then thirdly, there are many people living with a mental illness right in our own communities, of course, and they're looking for a supportive faith community. So this is a major outreach area as well, and that they need a place that is inclusive, welcoming, and provides spiritual support. And this is something that we are very passionate about and want to help churches to be able to do this. So there are still some myths floating around that, despite becoming more aware and more educated, there's still some myths that are very important for us to get rid of. One is that Christians don't get depression as much as the general public, which is not true at all. We get cancer and heart disease, so we also struggle with depression or anxiety as much as the general public. And it's not a matter of faith and prayer. We can't take control of the symptoms of depression. It's not something that we can handle by sheer willpower, snapping out of it, or pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, or just using our strength to carry on. That it's an illness, and it's out of control. Then also we think, well, depression, everybody gets depressed at some point, right? What's the big deal? But depression, as the illness we're talking about, is very different from feeling sad or blue. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because it's so important to understand that. Same with anxiety. We think, well, we all get worried. And worry is just part of life, but anxiety disorder is very different from worry. And then finally, there's other myths, but these are some of the main ones we want to dispel. We think we need trained professionals to support people who have depression or anxiety. And yes, we need some trained professionals, and that's good, but there is so much that we as church and friends and supporters in our church community can do, and not that we don't need to just leave this to the professionals. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about anxiety and depression, just to give you some background. I'll hand that over to Winnie.
So just for some facts and some stats, 12% of the population experiences anxiety disorders, and that seems to be on the rise. A few years ago it was a little bit less than that, and it might even be a little more than that now, but certainly we are seeing a lot of people in our counseling practices with anxiety disorders. So this would include just the generalized anxiety disorder. Doctors call it GAD, G-A-D. It could also be about phobias, a real tremendous fear of different things. But fears that are over and above. I can say I'm afraid of spiders, but when it's an actual phobia, then it goes into a tremendous fear, and it interferes with our life. We have a panic disorder. That's when people can't breathe, and they think that they're going to die, and it's the room is falling in, closing in on them. It's a terrible thing to undergo. Then we have obsessive compulsive disorder, where everything needs to be, it's an anxiety where everything needs to be into place, or I have to wash my hands 100 times before I can leave anywhere, or I have to, we had one time somebody who had to check that the doors were locked, or somebody who had to line up their t-shirts in a certain order, and they just had so, and that becomes very time consuming and and then of course we have post-traumatic stress disorder. Our military are suffering from a lot of that, but it doesn't have to be just military. It can be a traumatic disorder for a traumatic incident that could cause this in any one of us. So the biggest thing for us is, so this happens in our congregation. So what does that mean for your church family? How does your church family then address people that are undergoing this, and not only just the people, but the family members as well? So let's go now to a continuum for anxiety. This will show the difference between, there's a gradual difference between worry, a healthy anxiety perhaps, and anxiety disorder. For example, it's normal to be anxious about public speaking, like we're doing today, or it's good and it's normal to be to be afraid when we're facing a bear or something that we need to be fearful about, so that we can either it's a fight or flight mode. Yet anxiety disorder affects everyday functioning, and it can keep someone from doing some things that they want to do, and it makes them do things that they don't want to do. I had a little, and it's beyond their control at the time. I had a little boy who couldn't get to school, and he would tell me that the anxiety robbed him of the ability to play with his friends, or bike, or go to school, or and it was very disturbing to him. So that's anxiety then. So let's talk about mood disorders for a minute. There are a lot of different types of mood disorders. The one that we talk about most is a clinical depression. It can be very debilitating. It affects over 10% of the population. You would be just inability to concentrate, all those different kinds of things. So then we have dysthymia, chronic low-grade mild depression, and that can last for up to 2 years or more. It's like the common cold of depression. We have bipolar. It's formerly called manic depression. It has severe rises and falls of mood, like we can get into a mania stage where we can think that we can go, we can do anything and everything, and we don't need sleep, and then we can crash and have severe depression. There's also seasonal affective disorder. A lot of people at this time of year might have this. It's called SAD for short. It's the rising and falling of mood with the seasons. Some people have it in the fall, some in the spring, but oftentimes it's related to the lack of sunshine and that we have. And then we have our postpartum depression. This is really important for those of us that are having children that are having babies. It happens to women up to 2. Actually, I've just been told this week that it's actually up to 4 years after having a baby or a miscarriage. Don't forget that when people have miscarriages, they can have the same symptoms as if they were had an actual baby. So it's far more debilitating than the baby blues that we might see, or a low mood. It can be quite dangerous if it's left untreated. Here's our continuum then of depression. Our blue day goes into sadness. We can have grief, and then it goes into dysthymia, depression, our clinical depression, and then could lead into suicide. So depressive symptoms like the loss of sleep and poor concentration mean that we begin to cope less well and things go wrong. And then this could lead to a greater level of depression, despair, negativity, and still worse, to physical symptoms. There's a lot of physical symptoms that go along with depression, and which can lead us to a place where we just find it very, very difficult to cope.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how clinical depression is different from the blues, and this is very important because we hear people say, well, everyone gets depressed, right? Everyone has days where they're down. What's the big deal? So we got to make sure we know the difference and we're able to respond accordingly. Recently I read on Facebook a good example that, in this example, said comparing depression to the blues is like comparing a paper cut to an amputation. So we need to get this straight. So we've put together a chart that may help us to understand the difference between depression and the blues. Because depression is an actual illness. It's a medical illness. Whereas sadness or the blues, yes, we all get that normal reaction. The symptoms of depression are multiple. There's physical symptoms, there's mood, there's thoughts, there's actions. It affects all parts of us. Whereas sadness or the blues, we're mainly feeling very sad. The duration for clinical depression, it has to have been at least 2 weeks or longer before doctors will even look at a diagnosis of depression. Whereas sadness or the blues, it's very brief. It can be some days, it may be longer, but it's brief. Suicide potential is there in depression. It can result in suicide. It doesn't mean everyone who's depressed is going to be suicidal, but it can result in suicide, and this is rare with sadness or the blues. And finally, the treatment. Clinical depression responds well to specific medication and or therapy. Those are the two main ways to treat depression. And yet sadness or the blues can respond to a good listener, having a good friend to talk to, time to heal, doing some self-care and supportive activities. So we cannot talk about depression without also talking about suicide. And all of our churches have had some experience with this. Some of our families have first-hand experience with suicide. Suicide is a major cause of premature and preventable death. Among those aged 15 to 34, suicide is the second leading cause of death. Rates for males, 3 times higher than for females. We believe that is because males choose very lethal and fatal ways, which makes it fatal. And 90% 50% of people who have suicided have a mental or addictive disorder. So again, we need to understand this and be able to support in these desperate situations. And some knowledge is critical, right? But we don't need to, as lay people, assess or diagnose. In fact, it would be better to err on the side of safety if you wonder if a person is being suicidal. You may be saving a life. And talking, another myth is that talking about suicide increases it. It does not. It prevents it from happening because the person finally feels relieved that they can talk about it. But that's a whole other webinar. There's so much information on suicide. So a quote that we felt was helpful to share with you and really gives us that information is that the World Health Organization predicts that by the year 2020, depression is going to become the second cause worldwide of years lost to disability. So our productivity, our economics, our health is all related to this. So it, again, gives us really good reason to educate our churches. So Winnie's going to go through a few pictures that might help us to understand this better.
So to help understand the brain and the medical part of depression better, we wanted to share with you some PET scans that we were shown at the World Health Stigma Conference in 2011. We thought these were really quite telling. So you've got a normal brain on the left side of the screen, and then you have a depressed brain. And Kim was said a blue brain. So we there's just not as much firing of the neurons at all with that, with someone who is experiencing depression. Now our next slide, you see the depressed brain on the left side, and there is a visible difference in the brain after receiving proper treatment toward recovery. It's really cool that science has come a long way, but we still have a long way to go in understanding the brain and how God has created us. But it's really important to know that depression has a physical component to it. And so it's not that somebody can just snap out of it. Their brain actually is not firing as it ought to be. So, no one is immune. We need to really know this. Everyone who has a heart can have a heart disease, and everyone who has a brain can have a mental illness. It really is no respecter of anyone. And so it sounds simplistic, but this is the truth. And so now we would just like to check in with Kim. Questions?
Well, you actually have several questions, but in the interest of time, it looks like we'll need to hold them till the end, because I know you're getting ready to get into the good stuff next.
Right.
The helpful tips.
Okay.
All right. So what can we do? The science and medical part is only one piece of the picture, and is definitely not enough by itself to help people recover and move forward. So as science and the medical field is working ahead, we also need to know how important and how much help the work of the church as a healthy community can provide. So there's a quote by John Vanier, and he says, "The church is not called to do extraordinary things. It is called to do ordinary things with extraordinary love." So let's see how that affects our ability to help those in our congregations who experience mental health issues. So when we visit, what we believe will affect our abilities to support. Our belief system drives so much of what we do. So we need to start with that place. That is foundational. Our foundational beliefs, we need to think about that. What do we believe about pain, suffering, and hope? What do we believe about the church's calling? What do we believe, what our own experiences and stories will affect our support? We need to think about how we believe about these things when we want to help people with mental illnesses. Our belief that mental illness is no respecter of anyone and can affect anyone, that we need to remember that as we can say, I'm never going to get this, but you're fooling yourselves if that's the case. And then our belief that everyone is created equal in the eyes of our Creator. Those with mental illness have a calling and a purpose, just as anyone else who doesn't have a mental illness or depression. They don't see that for themselves at this time, but you need to hold that for them. And that is extremely important. So what we know will affect how we support. We know that knowledge reduces stigma or attitude. What we need to become informed congregations. Knowledge then reduces fear. And knowledge increases our understanding. So we have much more empathy when we understand what's going on with people. And knowledge also increases our resources. And so just asking you to get to know the resources in your own community. They have lots of good things to say and lots of good things to do. There's also things on the internet that might be helpful for you as well. What we say affects our support. As we all know, words are powerful. I'm sure that all of us have been affirmed by people, but we've also been criticized. And so words kill, words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. That's a quote from Proverbs 18. And this is just so very true. We have been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we keep saying this, and I'm sure you've all heard this: do more listening than speaking. When you hear people that have a mental health issue or have troubles in their life, listen to their story, hear it. It might not be a time to be sharing your own story, because then it diminishes what they've said. So it's not a time to say a one-up on what the other person has said. You can share your story with someone else, maybe. Ask questions. How is it that they might think this way? If you think that they're not thinking well or correctly or whatever about an issue, just ask them. Instead of telling them that they're not thinking right, just ask them, how is it that they might think this way? And they'll come. God has given them their Holy Spirit as well. So you are just a facilitator, asking them to think about, or asking them to tell you how they think about these things. And just remember, words have the power to hurt, or they can have the power to give life. And Christ's words live inside of you, and use those words to build up the body. What we do also affects our support. So use a gentle approach, listen more, talk less, like we said. It doesn't help to come on strong with people that have depression or anxiety. Remember, they can't just snap out of it. When you're visiting, do short visits because they can't concentrate well. So it takes an awful lot of energy for them to even follow a conversation with you, if they can even have one. Support the proper treatment. If the doctor says that they need to be on an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, don't question them on that. Just say, oh, the doctor feels that you need to be on that, then maybe you need to do that. As you saw on those slides, proper treatment is usually with talk therapy, and it is with medication. So that would be a good thing to do. Random acts of kindness, you can do that for anyone. And doing the same things that you do with someone with a mental illness, we give all kinds of things to people that have physical illnesses or operations. You can do many of those same things. So June is going to tell us about that.
So we like to illustrate this a little more clearly by using a chart. And yeah, don't think that because someone has cancer, do we leave them alone and say, well, okay, the professionals will handle that? No, there is a lot that we can do as well. So let's look at some of those ordinary things we can do. We can visit in the hospital, and we do that well. And you can do that if they have cancer or if they have a mental illness. We can offer prayers for them at services. We have to have permission to use names, but otherwise we can just pray for those who are affected by mental illness. Sending cards or letters, listening, we talked about, giving moral support. We do that for someone who has cancer. We can do that for mental illness. Encourage sharing, encourage them to talk and share what they're going through. Make some periodic phone calls. It's good to stay in touch and keep at it. Help with special housing or job needs, because that will happen with mental illness as well as with cancer, right? Offer to shop for them or with them. Take them a meal. Mental illness has been called the no casserole disease, because it's not something that people think about helping with meals. Offer transportation, invite them back to services and sit with them if that would be helpful. Offer help with child care. We do that for people with cancer. We can do that for people with mental illness. Learn more about the illness so you can be a more informed caregiver, which is so important, and we're trying to do some of that today. Encourage networking with a community, or a support group, getting involved together, and encourage them to continue their interests or activities. There's strengths that everyone has, gifts everyone has. We need to encourage them to keep doing those. So hopefully this demonstrates a bit the ordinary things with extraordinary love that are possible in all of our churches. So another quote from Jean Vanier that we found really helpful is this quote: "The church's vocation, then, is not to become a community of psychiatrists. Rather, it's called to become a community of disciples who strive to embody and reveal God's extraordinary love." This isn't negating the doctors and the mental health community support services, because, Winnie and I are a part of that. We fit into that category. But rather, it encourages the work of the congregation as a congregation with one another within the church community. And sometimes we say, yeah, we get that. But with someone with depression or anxiety, it takes so long, or nothing seems to change, or I don't seem to be helping at all. So we hear that quite often, and it is a long-term support that's needed. But we also feel very good about this quote from Amy Simpson, who wrote the book Troubled Minds. Excellent book, by the way, if you want to read something about this. She says, "Ministry among people with mental illness requires a long-term commitment, just like ministry among those undergoing the process of sanctification." And who of us is not in that category? So we find this quote very helpful. So some helpful practical tips for your church. And again, some of these you may have heard before. Many of you may already be doing these things. We have found churches doing in different places and in different areas. But these are some tips we have found helpful. So learn the facts about how the illness is affecting the person. Individually, people will experience this differently, right? So what they need may be different from someone else who has experienced depression. So you build that relationship by listening. You also build your knowledge tremendously just by listening and being with someone who has a mental illness. Integrate into the life of the church. We've talked about that. Keep involved as much as they can be and as much as they want to be. Keep them involved. Keep connected. Develop a support system. Some churches have started support groups or Bible studies Our churches are good with care networks, and then doing some specific things, helping with job search or clothing. Those are very helpful. Winnie and I have put together a Bible study, which we did with disability concerns helping us, and it's called Let's Talk. It's available online through the Disability Concerns website or through our Faith and Hope website. So that is something that you could use if you wanted to. We also have other supports that we can offer in the community, such as a CAP program, which is a Congregational Assistance Plan program for counseling that Shalem, where I work, provides to churches, as well as wraparound. Some of you may have heard of wraparound, like circles of support around people. Those are also all very supportive ways to work with people with mental illness. Always keep your focus on the person themselves, okay? Not on you. It's about them. And that's important. Establish your own support network. You will need support. We can't do this by ourselves, so it's good to have your own support network as well. Don't gossip. Maintain confidentiality. So important for trust. We need to make sure we're trustworthy, because we've been put in a sacred position to help someone. Be genuine, accepting, and understanding. So just be yourself, and that's what people will like. And we need to know that this takes time. It's not a quick fix, it's a process. That's why, yes, we have to stick with it. Don't give up. And it's always helpful to remind yourself, hey, I'm not here to fix this, but rather to walk alongside the person. Just being with the person, just even sitting in silence is good because you're there. Include in outings and activities. Keep inviting. It may take a while, but keep doing it. Again, offer specific help. It's best to ask them what they need, right? Because we may decide something's helpful that is not helpful at all. So ask them what would be most helpful. And of course, don't patronize. Don't do things for them that they can do for themselves. That will not feel good. So hopefully these tips will give you some ideas to take back to your churches and try. So back to Winnie about things we might encounter.
So as you become more open in helping others who experience mental illnesses and their families, we thought it might be helpful to prepare you maybe for some of the things that you might encounter. This list certainly is not exhaustive. So some of the things that we might encounter, you encounter somebody who may not want to talk, then you just sit with them. You may have somebody who would cry a lot. You need to be able to be okay with that and hand them the Kleenex and just let them. A person who may have a panic attack, kind of know what you need to do for that. Asking them to breathe slowly through their nose, out through the mouth. And no one has ever died of a panic attack, so you need to stay very calm. Don't get panicky yourself, because that doesn't help. Family members who are in desperate need of support. This is an incredibly important thing.
We don't want to forget the family members, because they need the support as much as the individual experiencing mental illness. They're going through a really hard and desperate time. So if there's even just one thing you do, it would be to support those family members. Sorry, Winnie, go ahead.
You might also encounter individuals or family who are angry. They don't understand what God's doing here. And so, but that's okay. Don't berate them for that. It's a process. They need to work through some of that. You'll encounter people who are very fearful. They might not want to go out with you. So if they don't want to go out with you today, then you might ask them again, or they might want to just sit on their porch with you or something like that. You might encounter somebody who is suicidal. And if you do that, then you don't need to be the one that assesses their whether they are suicidal or not. If you feel there is a need, then you either take them to the hospital or you call 911. and you let the doctors decide that. You do not need to diagnose. And you might also, you just need to encounter the fact that you may be quite exhausted or totally drained after your visit. It's very emotionally draining. So as caregivers, what do you need in order to continue supporting people with mental health issues? You need a lot of support. Support one another. Create a buddy system. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. Work as a team. Don't overload one caregiver. If you know that somebody is a lot of needs a lot of care, then that caregiver doesn't need to have too many more people on their list, sort of thing. Watch out for each other. Cover each other with prayer. Know the signs of burnout and know when to say no. That I can't do this week, or I can't. That is healthy for yourselves. If you're not healthy, you can't be helping others, of course. Know who you can talk to without gossiping. Don't go after you visited somebody, oh my goodness, you should have seen how so-and-so was today. They wouldn't even get out of bed. Don't do that. You keep that to yourself, or you talk that over with just your buddy or maybe the pastor if that's appropriate. Also develop resource and referral networks. Provide training opportunities. We'd love to come to your church, or we'd love to, you that are in the States, there are the Disabilities Concerns has got a speakers bureau that we could maybe send somebody to you. Learn what you need to learn, I guess. And honor and recognize caregivers as an event. Sometimes that's a nice thing to do for your caregivers. And always take time for Sabbath rest and renewal. Allow the Lord to replenish you, because you need to have times where you can let go and just have the Lord fill you up. So most importantly, extend hope. When people have lost hope, be hopeful for them. Believe deeply in the power of God, of Christ's presence for them. Pray for the person, for the family, and just be the hands and feet and mouth of Christ to them. We wanted to leave you with this scriptural prayer to encourage you in this most important work. We want you to remember that you are not on your own, but that you have the power of the Holy Spirit available to you. So, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with the hope of the power of the Holy Spirit as you care for people with mental health issues, you care for yourselves, for your families, and those in your churches. Thank you. So these are just our credits then. Some of our resources. You'll see the website there for Faith and Hope and some of those things. And then why don't we're going to Kim and see if there's any questions.
Yep, we got a few questions waiting for you and just enough time to probably answer them. Here, the first one is, often when people are grieving the loss of a loved one, they wonder if they are experiencing depression. Can you shed some light on warning signs that would distinguish between normal grieving and depression?
I think I will pass that one on to Winnie, because she has done a whole workshop on the difference between grieving and depression. And so let's see what Winnie has to say.
So grieve, we need to say to people that it's okay to grieve, first of all. It is sad when somebody passes away or we have a tremendous loss. And grief also comes in waves. And for one person to the next, it is a totally different thing. It might take one person years, and it might take another person a year. One of the things that we at our church do that might be helpful resource is that we go to the Stevens Ministry website, and there's a set of 4 books for grieving people, and we give them a book at 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and then 11 months. Excuse me. The difference then, if it switches over, you might have a disenfranchised grief where people haven't heard you, or you haven't been able to tell your story, or you haven't been able to speak what it is deep in your heart. And that is when it can switch over and you can become despondent, and your concentration is poor, and then you may need to get some medical attention at that point, or some counseling. Sometimes counseling with grief, sometimes counseling is just all that is needed. Other times it might have slipped into a depression when it starts to affect what you do in your daily life.
Okay. Next question. A local church in Holland has started a support group for people and families dealing with mental health issues. Do you have any suggestions for how they might grow their group?
Wow, that's excellent that they're doing that. And there's lots of material available and resources for starting a support group. One is that Bible study we mentioned, Let's Talk. It's a very good Bible study. There's also support materials through the Mental Health Ministries in California. Susan Gregg Schroeder has written a book on depression and works with a support group. There are books on depression and anxiety that you could work through. There's also the local support groups where you could get more information about running and facilitating a support group, but that's wonderful. It's mainly that you want people to have a safe place to talk. You want to be able to encourage and support one another, not just vent about what's going on, but also you want to bring in some leaders to talk about certain issues at different points in time. Support group can be amazing because you get just as much out of giving information or helping others, of course, as you do yourself. And it's so important to be with people who you feel like understand. And this is a safe place to talk about it. So, yeah, wonderful. If you need more information, give us a call or email us, because we do have a lot of resources available for that.
And I'll just mention to the people quickly that your email addresses for Winnie and June will be available right after this slide, and also after the event when we upload the webinar recording, we are making the slides available. So a lot of the resources they've mentioned are also going to be on those slides. Next question, and we just got a couple minutes and got a couple questions. Hope we can get through them quickly. Someone wants to know how to differentiate being supportive or enabling when dealing with someone who's claiming to have depression. How to avoid enabling behavior when you think you want to be supportive?
That's an excellent question, and it is a fine line. Sometimes it's very difficult. One of the things that really helps is checking with the person how you can be helpful, making sure that you are being helpful according to the way that they are suggesting. Enabling is doing things for them that they can do for themselves, and that you don't want to do, because that takes away from their own dignity and strength. So you want to make sure the things they can do, they go ahead and do, but the things that are really difficult for them, you check out and see if there's a way that you can support and help. Often this is only going to be clear to you through your relationship with them, once you get to know them well or you've been with them for a while, because otherwise the fine line is hard to detect. I'm hoping that helps. If you need more information on that, again, give us a call or email us.
Okay, and here's our last question, which is kind of a segue from the last question you just answered, is how does one keep good and healthy boundaries when you're walking along someone who may have a personality disorder, for example?
Wow, another great question. Boundaries are so important, and often we forget about boundaries. In the church, we like to be supportive and care for people, but yes, boundaries are very important. That's a whole other seminar. We can talk about that for a long time, because as soon as your boundaries are crossed and you're not able to do good self-care, you are not going to be much help to someone else. And it's not, mental illness or mental health issues is no excuse for being rude or ill-mannered or hurting people. So we need to remind people of that. Just boundaries are, we need to put up that line, that fence where, okay, this is you, this is your problem, and this is me, and that we're separated. Again, excellent books. Cloud and Townsend have a really good book on boundaries, and there's a lot of other material that is available on that. Often it's a very important topic for our churches to talk about.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Winnie and June, for presenting on today's topic. Why don't they just snap out of it? Hope you had a good time at your first webinar.
I had a wonderful time.
It was great.
Agree with me.
Thanks
my
for,
feelings
Yeah,
will
it
be
was
hurt.
great. It was great.
We want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I want to let you know that this webinar will be available as hand. Recording is ready. That'll be done within the next 24 hours. And a survey will pop up on the screen when you exit the event today. Want to let you know all of your responses are confidential. None of your information is shared. It's just shared in summary form. No names are used. Please let us know how we do. And you can continue the discussion at crcna.org/network. There's a Disability Concerns Network there. It's a section of resources and discussion forums and discussion topics. If you'd like to continue the discussion, find additional resources that can be found there. Ministry shares, where would we be without them? They account for nearly 25% of the ministry we're able to do together as a denomination, and these webinars are made possible through the generous gifts of the Christian Reformed Church. So thank you to those churches who are giving to this end that we can have webinars like this. Our next webinar is going to be next Wednesday, Listening Prayer, presented by Mary Sternberg, November 19th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope you'll be able to join us for that webinar. Thanks again to Winnie and June, and thank you again to all of you who joined us today. We know that you have a lot of different ways you can invest your time. Many demands are made upon it. So we thank you very much for investing it with us today in this webinar. Until you join us again in another one, God bless you.